Excellent. So good evening and a very warm welcome to our first event in this winter semester's keynote lecture series at our center GCSC here. My name is Kugele. I'm head of research coordination here at our center. And thanks very much for taking the time and coming out to join us tonight. I'm very much looking forward to the event tonight that will allow us to learn more about the work of our distinguished guest, Professor Henk de Berg, and to discuss with him the rhetoric of a man who is currently campaigning to get re-elected as president of the United States, or elected a second time of America, Donald Trump. As most of you know, our traditional keynote lecture series here at our center aims to offer a prominent platform for established scholars from Germany and abroad. And over the course of the semester, this series will provide an opportunity to get acquainted with interdisciplinary perspectives on the study of culture, and an opportunity to engage in an exchange with experts in their fields. We're thrilled that we are able to welcome tonight Professor de Berg from the University of Sheffield, where he is a professor of German. Thank you very much, Henk, again for accepting the invitation and for joining us tonight. The lecture event has been organized in cooperation with our Research Center for the Study of Culture, RCSC, and the newly founded Accent Area Cultural Narrative Studies. And before I hand over to my colleague, Professor Jan Rupp, for a short introduction of our speaker, allow me to add, as always, just a brief note on the format of tonight's event. Directly after the lecture, we will invite questions and comments from all of you in the audience. But for those of you who are joining online, during the Q&A after the lecture, if you would like to pose a question or make a comment, please just enter a plus and in the chat, and we'll be happy to add you to the list. However, if you prefer, you may just write your question or comment directly in the chat, and we'll be happy to read it out. And tonight's event, I should mention, will be recorded. The recording, however, is limited to the audio and video of our presenters, and the recording does not include the Q&A session afterwards. Neither does it include any chat activity or any metadata regarding the participants of this session. So please join me in welcoming Professor Henk de Berg, as well as Professor Jan Rupp, who is going to share some words of introduction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jens. It's a great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Henk de Berg. My name is Jan Rupp. I'm the coordinator of the Research Center for the Study of Culture here at the GCSC. The RCSC is a research hub for collaborative initiatives, one of which is the focus area Cultural Narrative Studies that Jens mentioned. Together with Professor Jan Eiber as the speaker of this focus area, we're organizing a conference on political narratives at the beginning of December. And it was in this context that we were excited to hear that Henk de Berg was going to be in town or in the area. I understand you're on a tour with your latest book, and we're very glad to have you for a stop here in Gießen. Trump and Hitler, a comparative study in lying, that's the title of the book, published with Palgrave this spring. And we suggested that you focus on Trump because he's such a topical example, so topical still, alas, of lying and political storytelling. Now, Henk de Berg is a professor of German at the University of Sheffield in the UK, specializing in German and French cultural theory, social and political thought, and the history of ideas. He's had a very international career, coming to Sheffield via Leiden in the Netherlands and Siegen in Germany. I'm going to be very brief about your further work and publications. It's a long list. You're currently already writing a sequel to Hitler and Trump, I believe. Your monograph, Freud's Theory and Its Use in Literary and Cultural Studies, first published in 2003, is an award-winning book and has been translated into multiple languages. And some of your early work actually came out of your time in Siegen and your association there with the first ever PhD research training group in the humanities in Germany. And that's another intriguing connection to what we're doing here. And another excellent reason to have you here. We've just been welcoming a new cohort of PhD students for the winter semester, And so we're all looking forward to your talk, Trump Talking Bigly, Trump's Rhetoric and Analysis. Please join me, everyone, in giving a warm welcome to Professor Henk de Berg.
Thank you, Jan, for that very kind and worryingly positive introduction. You've put the bar rather high. Thank you to all of you for being here and for inviting me. Also many thanks to our Deus Absconditus, Ansgar Nunning, who told me that he would have liked to be here, but unfortunately he can't. Talking Bigly, Trump's Rhetoric and Analysis. I'll talk for about 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. I'll try not to make it too boring. On that note, let me start with a little anecdote, a little joke. In the mid-1990s, Boris Yeltsin was president of the Russian Federation. At a press conference, he was asked about the Russian economy. President Yeltsin, a journalist, said, "Can you summarize for us, in one word, the state of the Russian economy?" Yeltsin thought for a moment, and then he said, "Good." The journalist said, "Thank you very much, President Yeltsin. And slightly more extensively, can you summarize for us the state of the Russian economy in 2 words?" Not good. This is how I feel about my English. My written English is good, my spoken English less so, even though I've lived in the UK half my life. So if my English sometimes sounds a bit strange, put it down to my foreign background. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this lecture, it is this. This is not how we should see Donald Trump, right? This is the picture that most of us have of Donald Trump, of this loose cannon who doesn't really know what he's doing, basically is out of his depth in politics, gets angry, bites the carpet on the slightest occasion. And here we can see a list of things that this particular author, he's called here Anonymous. We now know that this was the Department of Homeland Security official Miles Taylor. A book he published in 2019, a warning, and we have here a list of most of the things that quite a lot of people think when it comes to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is all over the place, baby-like, clueless, confused, crazy, distracted, easily swayed, erratic, forgetful, gullible, haphazard, ignorant, impatient, impulsive, inattentive, incurious, inept, intellectually lazy, irascible, naive, undisciplined, unfocused, uninformed, unstable, and vain. Now, vain might be true. I don't think that any of these other epithets really apply to Trump. Trump was and is, whether you like him or not, an extremely disciplined, extremely intelligent, extremely cunning politician who plans everything, right? So don't think that this is a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing, down to Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating the pets of the people living there. I'll come back to that example later on. So I'll give you one example of the fact, we think of Trump and there's this sort of, the big red head and again, Trump losing it and sort of, one example. This is in the run-up to the 2016 election. And Trump is about to hire Jason Miller as communications director. Jason Miller is still Trump's main communications director. And Miller originally worked for Texas Senator Ted Cruz. So Miller comes in, Trump is there in a room with various people working for Trump. And Trump says to Miller, so you come from Cruz, right? You guess you want to join the winning team. And then Trump says, okay, now before I can hire you, I need to know where your loyalties lie. So I need you've got to give me some negative information, some dirt on Ted Cruz. Give me some dirt on Cruz. And Jason Miller says, I can't do that. That's my former boss. That would be illoyal. And Trump said, of course you can do that. You're going to work for me. Give me some dirt on Ted Cruz. Miller still refuses to do this. 2 more rounds of this, with Miller still refusing. And then suddenly Trump turns angry. His face goes all red, and he shouts at Miller. And I apologize for the vulgarity. I'm not fucking around anymore. Give me some dirt on Cruz or you're out of here. Okay, that's more Robert De Niro than Donald Trump. I can't do the accent. But Miller is completely taken aback. So are the people sitting there next to Trump. Think, oh my God, what's going to happen? Jason Miller is expecting security to come for him any moment to remove him from the room. Trump is staring at Miller, and then after a few seconds, Trump breaks into this big grin saying, that's the right answer. Because if you had said something negative about Cruz, I know that eventually you would have betrayed me too. So this was all an act, right? And we know from, I shan't go to other examples from Trump's life, but we know from Trump's biographies, from what people have said about him, that this is a strategy that Trump uses quite frequently. Even when he was young, when he was playing sports, Trump was never late. Trump never complained, including when he lost. He never had a tantrum when he lost. This is an exceedingly cunning, disciplined guy. Where are we here? So that's my key assumption, basically, that Trump was is a populist political performance artist. And there are 2 aspects to this. One is his self-staging, and the other one is his rhetoric. And I'll focus on the rhetoric, but I do want to say a few things about his self-staging and charisma as well. So the the advantage of using the concept of charisma is that charisma is a relational category, right? So charisma isn't something that is inherent in a person, but it emerges in the interaction between a person and their audience. So 2 people can meet Trump at the same time, and one can go away from the meeting thinking, Trump is the most brilliant politician I've ever seen, the best thing since sliced bread, and someone else can come away from a meeting with the idea that Trump is an idiot. So using this concept of charisma has the advantage that you don't have to try and sort of figure out why Trump is so brilliant, but you've got to look at the relation between him and his audience. Now that concept of charisma, as many of you will know, comes from Max Weber, who distinguishes between 3 types of authority. Traditional authority, which is based on tradition, obviously, so the king, King Charles, or any other sort of authority or leadership that is based on people or person having done or been something for a long time, or their parents have been this as well, and so on. Legal authority rests on the rational acceptance of laws, right? So a democratically elected leader, and then charismatic authority rests on the perceived qualities of the person involved. These are, of course, ideal types, right? You never have just one. So in the case of Trump, there is some traditional authority there, I guess, because his father was already a successful businessman, and then Trump became a successful businessman, taking over the Trump organization from his father, Fred Trump. When Trump became president, there was obviously legal authority, but there's also charismatic authority. Now, the problem with that concept that is frequently applied to populist leaders, authoritarian leaders, dictators such as Hitler, is first of all that it is content-wise empty. Right? It doesn't tell you anything about what this charisma might consist of, and it also pays insufficient attention to the way people like Trump, charismatic leaders, can exploit and fake their charisma. And that's why when looking at Trump's charisma, I prefer to use the concept of the aura introduced by Walter Benjamin in a very famous essay from the 1930s that most of you will have read, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And there Benjamin defines the aura, as far as definitions go, as the unique phenomenon of a distance, however close it may be. Einmalige Erscheinung einer Ferne, so nah sie sein mag. And Benjamin gives an example, which is this one, which is not particularly helpful. So, the way I see the concept of charisma is, suppose you've just made love to someone, right? It wasn't just sex, you've made love, you're lying next to that person whose warm body is so close you can touch them. And at the same time, because you're desperately in love, it feels absolutely beautiful. It feels as if you were transported beyond yourself. It's almost like a sort of mystical experience, right? So on the one hand, you've got proximity, closeness, however close it may be, but at the same time, it feels far away. So if we go back to this example, right, you're walking through a park, Sunday morning, the sun is shining on the leaves, it feels just beautiful, almost mystical. Okay, I'm not saying this happens all the time you make love to someone or you walk through a park, but sometimes this happens. And then you have this awe-inspiring experience. That combination of proximity and distance. And that is the aura. An awe-inspiring experience which comes out of this combination of proximity and distance. So this is my thesis here. So Trump is not just charismatic but oratic. He's close to the people literally when he's shaking hands, and ideologically, because he constantly says, I am your voice of the people. But he's also far away because he is the chosen one, the one that will redeem the country. And that aura, Benjamin tells us, Benjamin is talking or thinking about Hitler in this essay, right? This aura is not inherent in Trump, but emerges in the interaction with his audience, and it is something that Trump deliberately fakes, that he creates. So, Trump is, this is the idea, both like all of us and unlike any of us. And then there's a question, of course, how did he do this? And because the focus of my talk is on rhetoric, I won't have much time to talk about this, but I just want to give you a few examples again where maybe you think, I hadn't realized that this is what Trump is doing. So, for example, his predilection for junk food, right? So Trump couldn't portray himself as an ordinary working class guy because he was a famously rich New York businessman, right? So he has to have other stratagems, other tricks to come across as like us. And this is stuff he then tweets or have other people tweet about him. When Trump was still a businessman, only a businessman, it was very easy to make appointments with him. You could just ring him up. He didn't look down on people. And then, of course, later, when he starts to run for president, people could take selfies with him and so on. Right? That obviously changed when he became president, when he had to be a little bit less available. And now, of course, after these basically 2 assassination attempts, he's even more cautious. But this is the idea, okay? I'm going to be like you. And we'll see some of that coming back in the rhetoric as well. But then at the same time, he's got to be the savior, right? So when Trump announced his candidacy for the presidency in June 2015, he didn't do what other candidates do, which if we've got the podium, and then you either walk up the podium like this, straight ahead, or you come from the side wings. Trump came from above. He rode down the escalator in Trump Tower. And we know from league tables and organigrams, power resides at the top, right? And of course, God is in heaven, right? The Savior comes from above. And this is a trick that Trump had already used in The Apprentice. The first series of The Apprentice starts with Trump circling, hovering over New York in a helicopter, and he comes from above. And when then The Apprentice was broadcast, and at the end, he would fire one of the people on each of the teams. Well, he would fire one person in one team. These people had to take the elevator up to the boardroom where Trump was. In reality, when they were filming this, Trump's boardroom and where the candidates were, it was on the same floor, right? But they had to go, they were filmed as if they were going up one floor, because that's where your boss is. And this Trump almost certainly got from the woman here, Leni Riefenstahl, who in 1934-35 directed the film Triumph of the Will, the most famous Nazi propaganda film. A film on the 1935 Nuremberg rallies, 1934 Nuremberg rallies film comes out in 1935. And that film, I'm sure you've seen this clip, or many of you will have, starts with Hitler arriving from above, also almost as a savior, flying into Nuremberg. Then he takes the car and he stops, and then a woman and a child, a woman with a child on her arm, give him some flowers. So the woman and the child representing the present and the future of Germany. And I think, if this had been today's day and age, Hitler would probably have stopped to give his supporters the opportunity to take some selfies, right? The thing that Trump did. So the guy there to the right, Steve Bannon, Trump's chief political strategist for the 2015-16 elections, was heavily influenced by Leni Riefenstahl, as was the guy there below him, Roger Ailes, the founder and chairman of the conservative news channel Fox News. And they both worked, as I say, for Trump, and were heavily influenced by Leni Riefenstahl. Okay. So here's another example of how Trump tries to be special. We see there to the right, Trump taking the ice bucket challenge. Normally, people would wear, bathing trunks or maybe shorts and a t-shirt or something like that. Trump wants to be in a suit. He always wears a suit and a tie, except for when he's golfing, right? To the right there, this is the outfit he wore when he was a businessman. White shirt, red tie, dark grey or black jacket. Then when he started to run for president, he kept the white and the red, but he started to wear blue jackets, the colors of the American flag, right? So nothing about this is a coincidence or an accident. Right, moving on to Trump's rhetoric. I first of all want to identify some of the key principles underlying Trump's rhetoric. Trump never wrote them down, and I don't think he ever reflected on them in interviews, but looking at and listening to what he said, we can distill a number of key principles, sort of pillars, underpinning his oratory. Trump speaking is speaking. It's not sort of eloquent in the way a writer would speak, right? Barack Obama had a much more sort of eloquent approach. Trump hasn't, and we'll look at some examples in a moment. And the spoken word has its own criteria. So when it comes to things like logic, non sequiturs, meandering, rambling, right? Trump doesn't do the logic, but he does all the other things, the non sequiturs, the rambling, the meandering. And you think, what the heck is he trying to say? You know, he's all over the place. But it works in speech, and especially with the meandering and the rambling. That's a topic I'll come back to. So you don't direct yourself at intellectuals, but you aim for the lowest common denominator. Scholars of linguistics have looked at Trump's language and said his sentence structure and vocabulary is that of a 12-year-old when he's speaking. This is true in his speeches, his rallies. It's not true in some of his interviews. So interviews with newspaper journalists, where he isn't being filmed, these newspaper journalists, and these are intelligent people in New York Times, Washington Post and so on, they've described how then Trump's sentences, they suddenly grow longer. The vocabulary becomes much more complicated. He can do these things. He elects not to when he has his rallies. Can skip Keith Oatley. Okay, this is perhaps the most obvious one, right? Address people's emotions, not their minds. You go to the heart of the audience. And this idea obviously goes way back to classical antiquity. This is one of the key studies on that by the way was very influential on Adolf Hitler. Gustave Le Bon, crowd psychology, psychologie de foule, and the most famous quotation from that text is there at the top. On domine plus facilement les peuples en excitant leur passion qu'en s'occupant de leurs intérêts. Just think about this for a moment, right? It's not about their interests. It's not about what they perceive to be their interests. Come back to this in a moment. People do not vote sort of in a kind of self-interested economic way. Okay, when Clinton's Bill Clinton's chief political strategist, James Carville, famously said, "It's the economy, stupid." It's not. Right? It's not about people's interests. It's about things like self-worth. I hope I have a little bit of time later on to talk about that in more detail. And then this one, the visual aspect of speaking is at least as important as the content. And Trump was and is an incredibly visual speaker. He uses his rubbery face to express emotions such as anger, disgust, surprise, a bit like the British comedian Rowan Atkinson does. Atkinson does it in a rather more subtle way, right? But Trump constantly mimics other people, uses his hands much more than ordinary American politicians. When he ridiculed Marco Rubio in the 2015 campaign, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, who tended to sweat a little bit when doing a debate, then Trump ridicules that, sort of splashing water when Trump is splashing water and said, this is Marco Rubio, right? And he does this because he realizes that visual impressions are much stronger than speech. This is why most of us are much better at remembering faces than names, right? And this is also something that political advisors and spin doctors know it's really important to make the right visual impression. So here we have again Roger Ailes, the founder and chairman of Fox News, who wrote what I still think is the best book on public speaking ever written, You Are the Message. Roger Ailes, as you know, was a rather unpleasant guy who sexually harassed his female employees relentlessly. There's a really good film about that called Bombshell with Charlize Theron. And to the left you see a kind of biography kind of thing on Roger Ailes, starring Russell Crowe, I think. Right, so one of the things that Roger Ailes says, if I want to know if a politician that I'm working for is giving a good speech, what I'm doing is I turn off the sound and I just watch. Because the visual aspect is 85-90% of what we do. Those of you who have French might be interested in this documentary, which is on the web, but only in French. It's called Couper le son, and of course that means turn off the sound, right? René Zaillant was not just a political scientist, but a body language expert, and he analyzes the body language of a range of famous French politicians whom we see there. Okay. And, of course, the superior speaker needs a superior knowledge of what the media are saying. So one of the critiques that has been made of Trump is this guy is watching television all the time, right? He hardly sleeps. He has 4 hours, maybe 5 hours sleep per night at most. He wakes up, then people think he starts sort of, tweeting aimlessly, mindlessly. And then he watches TV 5 or 6 hours a day. This guy isn't working. But of course, if you're that kind of political performance artist, you have to know what the media narrative is. What people are saying about you, what people are saying about your opponents. So Trump watching the news all the time, that's work, right? It's not his being lazy. And you should prepare your speeches with superior care and attention. We see here Stephen Potter's famous book, One-Upmanship, which is about how to be successful at Harvard University. And one of the things you have to do, Stephen Potter says, you've got to come across, obviously, as a brilliant scholar. This is interesting for people doing a PhD. So you've got to do one of two things, right? Either you've got to show people that you're working all the time. There's nothing more important to you than your career. Or you've got to show people that you're a genius, you don't need to work, right? So you say, I'm going on holiday 3 weeks, okay? Pretend you're going on holiday, you're in wherever you are, and get up at 6 o'clock, you start working till 12 o'clock at night, and you do that every day, but you tell people, I went on holiday. That's the thing Trump does, right? Do not think that he does not prepare the debates. That's what people say. So Trump says, I don't need to prepare. He absolutely does that. So here we have Trump's tweets. Really well prepared, not just, not just fired off without thinking. This book by Cliff Sims, one of Trump's more rational advisors. And that gives us the pets in Springfield, Ohio. Haitian immigrants, Trump said during the debate with Kamala Harris, Haitian immigrants are eating the cats and dogs of people living in Springfield, Ohio. A, untrue, B, completely crazy, C, completely over the top, right? But what happened afterwards? What were people saying? Donald Trump is talking about immigrants in Ohio. Donald Trump is lying again. Immigrants in Ohio are not eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Trump outrageous lie about immigrants. Immigration, another topic, yet again a topic for Trump. So what do we hear? Trump, immigration, immigrants, crime. So he dominates the media cycle once again. And when the debate took place, Kamala Harris still had momentum. Right? And people were still talking about Kamala Harris. After all, she was new, right? It wasn't Biden anymore. Suddenly it was Kamala Harris. So Trump takes back the media cycle and he focuses it on his strongest topic, which is immigration. Kamala Harris was the so-called border czar, and what has happened, we're being flooded with immigrants. All these criminals. And Kamala Harris is to blame. So he not only dominates the media cycle, he focuses it on the thing that he's strong on, right? His running mate, J.D. Vance, then actually later on sort of admitted that if this is what it takes to get people to talk about immigration, then we'll take it. That doesn't mean that Trump did wonderfully in this debate. By all accounts, including my own, he lost the debate. We can talk about why, right? But this wasn't a mistake. That's the point I'm making. So let's look at some of Trump's rhetorical strategies. I'm just looking at you two guys there. How much time do I still have? Half an hour? It's 7 o'clock.
Half an hour. We can take half an hour. If we have a little bit of discussion afterwards.
That would be good, yeah, okay. So, jokes, insults, and sexism, one of Trump's strategies. What is it that you don't want when you're considering whether to go to a political rally or a lecture for that matter, or as a journalist? You don't want it to be boring, right? So jokes, insults, and sexism, how wrong suddenly the insults and the sexism are. It's interesting, right? We know this from social media, sadly, right? And also joking and insulting other people when they're not there, and maybe a bit of locker room talk as well. It creates a community, right? It's a form of community formation. Blokes together, you may make a joke, not me of course, you may make a joke that is sort of a little bit risque, a little bit politically incorrect, the others laugh, you have your community, right? So this is Trump on Rick Perry. I'm not sure whether the bit at the end was a deliberate pun or not, but I actually thought it was, yeah, it's good, right? I mean, it's a bit unfair on Perry, maybe, but it works. This is rather more awful, sexist, but also memorable, right? Reportable. So this is going to be reported on, including, and maybe first of all, by news stations like MSNBC, who's fairly left-wing, CNN, sort of center-left. Look at the appalling thing that Trump said. And of course, then everyone hears this, right? And this is before he started to run for president. Again, pretty awful on the one hand, pretty devastating on the other hand, right? So these are not strategies that I would encourage you to use. I think they're awful, but I'm trying to look at this sort of stuff analytically and ask the question, why and how does it work? Why do you go to a rally? Why do journalists report about rallies? Well, if there's stuff going on, right? Keir Starmer, Olaf Scholz, Olaf Scholz is a meeting. I mean, what's it going to go to an Olaf Scholz meeting? You know, I'm a big Olaf Scholz fan. That's not the point. But you know, you're highly unlikely to get fireworks. Just a few weeks ago, I think for the first time ever, Olaf Scholz showed a bit of emotion in a debate, and everyone immediately reported about this. You'll remember this, right? But Trump knew and knows controversy sells. This is sad, but again, we know this from social media. So this is Trump at a rally. There's someone whom he doesn't like, who's being a bit, or maybe shouting at Trump or whatever. Yeah. And again, reported again by CNN, MSNBC, CBS, and so on and so forth. So this is obviously not going to bring all Americans on board, right? But Trump knows this. Populism, probably a cutoff point between 40 and 50%. If you look at Holland, if you look at Italy, and so on, right? So what Trump does is he says there's a number of people who are never going to vote for me anyway, right? So what I want to do is get a hardcore group of followers who will A, support me no matter what, and B, will come out to vote for me. This, by the way, is why I'm worried about the upcoming American elections, because there are lots of people who say they will vote for Kamala Harris, but will they also come out, right? And Trump supporters are, on the whole, much more fanatical. And at the moment, now that they're sort of both neck and neck, Trump's whole strategy seems to consist in making sure that these people that like him actually turn out and vote, because this will be a turnout election. So there's also entertainment here and community and individual empowerment. Now that is something that I'm working on at the moment, but I do want to, but I'll just skip it. But it's again the idea, or it's the idea first of all that these rallies are community, forms of community formation, but they're also individually empowering. We can talk about that in the discussion. So in that sense, it's a little bit like Taylor Swift's The Eras Tour, right? I do apologize to any Swifties in the room. But you are there together with a group of people and you feel that sense of community, right? And sadly, the same thing happens when we see populist rallies. People recognize each other, they recognize and accept and embrace their shared cultural preferences, and so on. And it creates what the theater expert Ben Stegemann has called a Gefühlsgemeinschaft, a community of feeling. And that bottom left, Hans-Ulrich Gumbrecht, talks about this in terms of the distinction between presence cultures and meaning cultures. I'll skip that too. This is the kind of thing that we know when we talk about populists, right? It's simple, straightforward, there's lots of repetition, but there's also, and this is something I'll talk about later, there's also interpretative openness. So different people and different groups of people will interpret what is said in different ways. As I say, I'll explore that in more detail a little bit later on. But simplicity and repetition is also done in order to come across as authentic, right? Because normally we're academics, so probably even in, when you go to the pub, we have this tendency to talk sort of intellectual stuff, right? It's not the case with most people. Most people talk in a very different way. And that's how you have to come across, right? So, as the American film mogul said, the most important thing in the film business is honesty. Once you've learned to fake that, you're in, right? And it's with these rallies, the most important thing is authenticity. Coming across as authentic, The moment you've learned to fake that, you can become a populist leader. Rambling and meandering. So if, like Trump, you have this idea that America is threatened by immigrants, especially Mexican immigrants, but also the Democratic Party and the FBI, you know, the deep state, and so on and so forth, then what you try and do, you don't want to confuse people by giving them too many enemies. You want to have one enemy, right? So you've got to talk in a way that links all these people together in sort of a satisfyingly universal conspiracy theory. The Democrats are left-wing extremists who are in favor of open border policies. That is why all these Mexican immigrants come in to kill us and mug us and rape our women. And all of this is covered up by the fake media, supported by the deep state. Right? It all hangs together. Now, if you try and make that argument logically, argumentationally, is not going to work, right? Because it's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, there is no logic there. But through rambling and meandering, you go from one enemy to the next enemy to another, blaming first one, then another person for America's ills, in a discourse which kind of seems to hang together, then that idea, that conspiracy, can come across as relatively convincing. Okay, I'll skip this. This is again about empowerment, and this is Ernst Bloch, of course. I'll skip that. Extremism and aggression. So when Trump ran for president in first time round in 2015, very few people took him seriously. Most people said he's just doing this for his business, right, in order to get publicity for the Trump organization, Trump hotels and all the rest of it. You can't take this guy seriously. In any case, you know, even if this is a serious attempt on Trump's part, he's never going to get enough people on board with language that is so overblown, so excessive, so extreme. No one's going to fall for that. And it took the critics, journalists and scholars, several months, and I think they're still not yet fully there, to figure out that whilst they, the critical intellectuals, took Trump literally but not seriously, his followers took him seriously but not literally. And one of the things that Trump's followers were attracted by was the fact that Trump sort of, I hinted at this early on, speaks like us, right? He uses what the political scientist Marco Marini has called the language of the home. The language we speak when we are with our family and friends, when we're in pubs and restaurants, right? Because we do these things, right? We say we've got a new boss or a new head of faculty, right? And we say, this guy is terrible, he's worse than Stalin. Now, one would hope that a head of faculty or university chancellor, vice chancellor, is not as bad as Stalin, but that's the way we speak, right? When we're honest with ourselves, right? John is the most terrible person I've ever met. Or we say, you know, this new watch that I bought, best decision ever. Again, one would hope that buying a new watch is not the best decision one's ever made in one's life, right? But that's the way we speak, and that is why Trump came across as authentic, whereas someone like Hillary Clinton, to some extent, I guess, Kamala Harris as well, you've got a feeling this all comes out of polling, you know, spin doctors. It's very polished, you know, saying you've got to say this, you've got to say that. Kamala Harris is certainly doing that now, right? There are clips from her from the past when she tried to speak in a sort of a public situation, and it goes horribly wrong. There's a Daily Show, if you type in the Daily Show Kamala Harris, something like thought reader or mind consultant or something like that, you get this crazy 2 or 3 minute utterances by Kamala Harris, and they're completely incomprehensible. So now she's playing it much more carefully, not doing too many interviews, usually doing interviews with sort of relatively friendly news organizations, and that comes across as too polished. Trump is just, he's a you see is what you get kind of guy, is what people think, right? He isn't, but, right? Okay, and that takes us to my final point, which is the issue of narrative truth, which is, of course, a form of narrative untruth. And I'm not going to talk, I will talk about 4 points, but not about the third one here. So how are Trump's supporters able to take him not literally, but nonetheless seriously? One way in which they manage to do this, I would suggest, is by interpreting his excessive, extremist, and mendacious statements as what Scott Adams, the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, what Scott Adams has called directionally accurate. So directionally accurate is a statement that may not be empirically accurate, but which confirms us in our basic convictions, our basic preconceptions, and in that sense is seen as true, and which takes on inspirational force, suggestion as it does a direction of travel that we feel is right, even if on some level we are aware of the statement's lack of factuality. Right, so take the statements that Trump made in 2015 when he was running for president, and he was talking about Mexican immigrants, right? They're coming over the border, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. And yeah, I suppose some of them are good people, quote unquote, right? So I'm going to build a big wall, a big, beautiful wall, a solid stone wall, and Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Now, I don't believe that Trump followers believe any of this literally. Well, some extremists maybe. But they didn't. I think most of them didn't take it literally, which is why crime statistics and other empirical data were never going to change their opinion, right? So crime data show that immigrants, in any country, by the way, immigrants commit fewer crimes than people born in a country. What people did believe was that immigration was a serious problem, that this problem should be addressed, and that the existing political system was failing to do so. And quite a few of them were probably also unconsciously biased against Mexicans or non-white people generally. So what Trump's supporters heard Trump expressing was not a series of facts or lies, nor even a series of concrete, pun intended, policy proposals, but directional truth or inspirational truth, a statement that says, yes, you're right, there is a real problem here, and no one's doing anything about it, but I, Trump, will. I fear that this is behind a lot of the support for the AfD as well. In 2005, the American comedian Stephen Colbert coined the term truthiness for this kind of gut truth. Right? So truthiness is something that you feel in your gut is true. Colbert does not elaborate on this, but I think we can make, as I said earlier, 4 important points. Ignore the 4 there on the screen. Don't worry, just 5 or 7 more minutes to go. First, The gut-based perception of a lie as expressing some deeper truth involves a significant amount of interpretative openness, say with regard to Trump's statements about illegal immigrants. And then I think the range goes from something like, I think politicians are doing too little about immigration, to all these immigrants are scroungers and parasites who should be deported immediately. Right? And this, by the way, is also the reason that Trump then keeps shifting in different speeches to being a little bit more extreme and sometimes a little bit less extreme, because then he gives all these groups, each of these groups, a reason to rationalize your support for him. Right? Again, I think it's very similar with the AFD. Second, truthiness is not an individual phenomenon, but a group phenomenon. So it's not simply, I think it's true, but we feel that it is true. So truthiness is based on a shared perception. Because without such commonality in outlook, my felt truth is at best an idiosyncrasy and at worst a sign of mental illness. What makes truthiness persuasive is that other people feel like me. Third, because this kind of truth, in inverted commas, is a matter of shared perception, it is also a matter of shared narratives. Right? The mind thinks in stories, or at least that is its default position. So again, an example. Many Trump supporters believed and continue to believe that it was Trump who won the 2020 election and not Joe Biden. So does this mean that the Trump supporters are completely blind to empirical reality? I don't think that that's plausible. What happens, I think, is two things, two stages, although in reality these two stages, I think, take place at the same time. First of all, Trump's claim about vote numbers is consciously or unconsciously converted into a statement about the election's fairness. And second, this statement then, that the election was rigged, that is embraced because it feels accurate. After all, how could there have been a level playing field? What with the biased mainstream media? What with the left-wing establishment? So what is arguably Trump's biggest lie comes to be experienced as true because it dovetails with the overarching narrative of America as a country in the tentacles of a power-hungry liberal elite. So mathematically, Trump may not have received more votes than Biden, but that is not what matters to his supporters. What matters to them, decisive, is that the deck was stacked against Trump, that there was no level playing field. And in that deeper sense, Trump's lie feels like the truth. Right, so narrative truth works as a story interlinked with and underpinned by the stories of me as a member of my community. Narrative truth is about the story of us, our past, our present, our future. So truthiness is narrative truth, and narrative truth is existential truth. And that is why it is so hard to dislodge. Fourth and last, people assess the validity of stories not by confronting it with the facts, but by comparing it to other stories. Right? So is climate change a reality? I, for one, am not able to establish that empirically. I believe climate change is real because my view, my story of the society I live in, includes a significant amount of trust in science and in the scientific community. Same with the election results in say, the UK or Germany, right? I think that the election results in the UK can be trusted because I trust the political system and the legal system. If such trust breaks down, even the most basic facts will come to be questioned, and people will start casting about for a different explanatory framework. In other words, they will start casting about for a story, a new story, that will give new meaning to the old facts, explain the old facts away, rationalize things, make facts seem irrelevant and so on. And it seems to me that it is, in the case of Trump, but also, for example, in the case of the AfD, it seems to me that it is precisely this breakdown in social trust that Trump managed to exploit. He did so successfully in 2016, unsuccessfully in 2020, so let's see how he does this time round. Thank you for your attention. And if after a long talk you're still interested in hearing a bit more, this is the book it comes from.